tēnā tātou i ngā kaikaunihira, me ngā kaimahi, me te Marea whānui, kua hui mai nei tēnei rā, tēnei au ka mihi nei kia tātou, nau mai haere mai, to our strategy and policy meeting o tēnei wā. Hoi no, henare, mahau te whakatangi raku, play a guitar for our, we'll have a waiata, and then we'll have a karakia. Te are mahau te karakia? Yeah, ka pai. Kia ora. Kia tū tātou, e tū.
Haere mai. Haere mai, haere mai, haere mai, haere mai, he nei e. Haere mai, he runga ho, te marae, huri mai tātou, tātou. Ka pai, kia ora tātou. Kia ora tātou. Tēnā koe te are I o kupu whakamoemiti kia whakatūwhera pai tēnei hui ngā tātou. Nau rā te arawhata ki te rangi. Nō rea, tēnā koe. Tēnā koe henare I o tō waiata. So welcome everyone to Strategy and Policy today. Me mihi ka tika ki o tātou mate, ko Annie Aranui tērā, ko Tanya Eden tana taina. Tanya Eden, the younger sister of, well, I don't know if they're younger or older, but tuakana taina pia, of Annie. So she's an apology. It's still a bit raw for the whānau, so she's not back on board yet. So we have an apology from her. But just to say that we are streaming live today, people. So there are hopefully lots of people tuning into us today via the internet. Yeah. So just to remind those watching that our councillors are using the iPad for mahi, and so they're not surfing the internet. They're looking at the papers, and councillors don't block the microphones with your iPads. Kura te pānui. So we have Tanya Eden as an apology. Any other apologies? And ka pai. Councillor Ollie. Apoe. Yep. Moved by Tanya, seconded by Your Worship, Sandra. All those in favour, ki mai ai. Aye, kia ora. Ka pai. Do we have any leave of absence requests? No. Kia ora. And conflicts of interest. We'll just deal with those if there are any. I don't think there are, but if there are any, we'll just deal with those as our normal procedure. So we have the minutes of the last meeting on the 19th of November 2021. Someone happy to move those? Thank you, Councillor Harvey, seconded by Councillor Sholem. All those in favour, ki mai aye. Aye. Any against? Carried. Thank you. Kia ora. So, so we have the agenda here, and I just wanted to take a couple of moments just to update the committee on progress, I guess, since our last meeting in November. And because there's been a lot of work, to say the least, from the council in terms of strategy and policy, and really just want to start with the long-term plan, which really is the base document for council first, but also for the strategy and policy committee, and just to really let us all know that once we sign that off in June, that will be, I guess, the guiding document for all of our committees, for all the work that we do here at council, and so that'll be a major achievement when that's adopted by council in June. But just to acknowledge the work that's gone into that, it's come across our table at council, and we have approved it to go for consultation. But the LTP, long-term plan, strategic plan, our rautaki for the next 10 years contains everything that we do as council. It is our strategy going forward. And so I just want to really highlight, I guess, the key headings from our strategy, so that, the public really know where we're going. So you'll see in the paper there the reasons why we have an LTP 1.3, but also sets out the 8 strategic priority areas. So I'm just going to read those out. That we in Hastings District are an economic powerhouse. So employment, economic growth, and that we're growing into the future. That we have homes for our people, that people are able to live in a warm, safe home, and it's a huge issue for us at the moment. It's probably the biggest issue for our district at the moment is finding enough homes for our people. We know we have some major challenges there, which we've canvassed, over the last 6 months or 12 months really. And so we are looking for solutions for homes for our people. Getting around, making sure that we can connect places, people, markets, etc., etc. So our roading network, our rural living, to acknowledge our, and Nick is here from the Rural Community Board, along with Sophie, Tan, to really ensure that our rural communities are still a key focus for the work of council. So, it's good to see that is one of our key priority areas. Our natural treasures, ensuring that Heretaunga Hauku Nui, or Heretaunga Hawke's Bay of the fertile plains, that whakatauki continues to exist, and that we support our soils and our productive land, horticulture, and the growing of food. And that's why, in the early 1800s, a lot of people, a lot of iwi wanted to come here and take over Hawke's Bay for themselves. Why? Because the plentiful kai. It was a place where, the kai grew. There was plenty of tuna, and then when you came to Waimarama, plenty of kaura as well. And paua back then, heaps of paua back then. So Hastings Alive, our CBD, making sure that our urban areas are vibrant, our city centres are safe, and there's a lot of work going on in the CBD. I said it at the council meeting that every street you go down, all the corners are under development, and that's exciting. Can't wait to get those wrappers off and see what we got there. But we've got a lot of things going on in our CBD. Pathways for people, looking at education, making sure that our people are thriving, our communities are thriving, people are positive, and that Hastings is a place that people want to live.
And lastly, well, enhancing where we live, neighbourhoods, community safety, vibrancy, neighbourhoods, wellness, well-being. Yeah. So, yep, no, just a reminder really to the committee that we do have an LTP out for consultation, and will be ratified in June. But that is our key document. That is our key document. Now, one of the last thing I want to mention is we did launch our Hastings medium-term, long-term housing strategy back, I think it was in February. Was it February? Yeah. Which outlines, I think it's 26. 26 key work plans, work areas, which will detail how we're going to get more houses and more homes for the people of the district. You know, looking at our urban development, how we can better develop our residential areas, and then you know, discussions around our greenfields development, and you know, where we go with that, because the demand is there, and we need to address that. So yeah, so that's my report as chair of the committee, and you know, if anyone wants to add to that or to questions, Kate Pai. Otherwise, I'll just ask that someone move in and second it. So we've got a mover by Sister Councillor Travers and seconded by Councillor Harvey. Oh, but before that, we can move and second it, and then we can come to. Oh, you want to? Yeah, okay, we'll go to you first.
Through you, Chair, I'd just like to ask a question to the staff under enhancing where we live, and thank you for your report and thank you for your update. I would like to understand under enabling Marae-based settlement development. I'd like to understand that it's probably our partner TPK, but we supported the Marae support and investment through the Provincial Growth Fund, and I'd like to have a report on how that work is and how the Marae work is been undertaken, and who's doing it, and what has been achieved so far. If we could have a report back to us on that Marae update, please.
Kapai. Yep, that'll be good. You know, it would be good to get an update on it. I mean, for our Marae...
You want me to add it to the recommendations, or are you happy just to do it as an action?
Yep.
As an action. Thank you.
It's just a comment on the enhancing where we live. I've got to grasp the opportunity, and in terms of Flaxmere, in the last 12 months, there's been a very steady decline in terms of offences, to the point of fact that our crime rate is the lowest in Hawke's Bay. So, you know, this should be all over the front pages. It should be everywhere. To the point we had 35 judges stayed here for 4 days. They came here with a preconceived idea of Flaxmere, and it wasn't all complimentary. I can tell you now, they left there with tears cascading down their cheeks and full of apologies. And that's not an exaggeration or an overstatement. So enhancing where we live, this is a community that have taken ownership and responsibility. And now we're starting to bear the fruit of that. We're certainly not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it is Flaxmere's time. Fix Flaxmere, you fix the whole district. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. And that's a pretty awesome statistic, to have the lowest crime rate in the district. Jeez.
Just one, and it's not due to any one person. It's a cluster of wonderful work being done, and much of it voluntary. We're littered with heroes and heroines in our beloved village, and that's why this has happened. It's not just one person.
Good boy. So we have a move and a seconder that the report be received.
Sorry, just to follow up, can I just acknowledge that what Councillor O'Keefe has just mentioned, and I think that's significant actually, and I think that, you know, given that we're watching the newspaper every day with, you know, statistics and things in the paper, And I think that, you know, do we have anybody from comms here? Perhaps, Rebecca, you might be able to take this up, because, you know, we would like this to be able to be shared. You know, we would like to see a community-led response to community wellbeing for our beloved Flaxmere. You know, people are leading, and our community's leading. So perhaps you could follow up with that for us. Thank you.
I'd like to support the two previous speakers. I think we need to be telling the great story of City Assist and what they've done within our CBD and what they've done out at Flaxmere. And there's a real holistic story there about working in partnership. So absolutely enhance. Let's get some of those headlines turned into a positive.
Yeah, and if you look at the front page of today's paper, I mean, you know, it shows some of the issues, some of the challenges that are happening in some of our communities, but not Flaxmere. You know, it's happening somewhere else. You know, maybe a couple of years ago it might have been Flaxmere, but not today. So, so we can definitely work that into a good news story, councillor, and our staff will take that away and work something up. Cowboy? What's that? Oh, got that as an action. Cowboy. So anyway, we have a mover and a seconder for the report, Chair's report to be received. I'll put that. All those in favour, keep my eye. Any against? Carried. Kia ora tātou. So we're going to move on to item number 5. We have an update on our insurance situation, our insurance policy, and I'll hand the time over to Bruce. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've this report really just focuses on our catastrophe cover that we have in place for our underground assets. We've had this conversation in a workshop setting, but this is bringing it back more formally for council to acknowledge the situation that we have. So there's an arrangement in place for underground assets from an insurance perspective, where the government picks up 60% of cost following a significant event. And it needs to be a reasonably significant event before the thresholds and deductibilities kick in to allow a claim to take place. So in that situation, we're responsible for looking after, obviously, our 40% share of any loss that may be incurred in an event. And we do that through the local authority protection program, and otherwise known as LAB. It's a mutual arrangement. We're a member along with about 30 other councils around the country, and they provide the cover for us for that 40% share. They provide cover at 3 levels, and at the upper end, around $140 million worth of damage is the upper limit. That's $140 million of total damage that would be incurred. So yeah, we've had some loss modelling undertaken and some scenario work where Aon through their partner agencies have modelled the impact of 3 significant events were they to occur in Hawke's Bay. Now, the most extreme of those is modelling of the 1931 Hawke's Bay earthquake and the impact that would have on our infrastructure. So we've given, through the modelling exercise, detailed information of our infrastructure that's below the ground, the type of pipes they are, the age of them, the soils that they're in, and all that, and they've modelled that through a very extensive program to come up with what would be a potential loss. And I think that the key thing is it's this is just an indication of what it could be. Obviously, in any event, it would be different. But what that does show us is that at the extreme end of an event like the 1931 Hawke's Bay earthquake, we would be exposed at the upper end, where this cover does not sufficiently cover us for the amount of damage that we would incur. In saying that, that's not necessarily a bad thing for council. This insurance cover is expensive. It's to have what we have it comes at about currently $265,000 a year to have this insurance. So obviously any additional layers to this and any additional cover comes with additional cost. And I guess if we sort of overlay that with the likelihood of that claim ever being required, then there's a consideration for council to think about, do we want to try and provide this cover, if indeed we can actually secure additional cover. But also, are there other ways of providing council with that assurity or that comfort that we can fund ourselves that additional amount of loss? So in the report, I've sort of covered off a couple of areas where opportunities would arise in that sort of situation. One of which, and the most likely, is that in a significant event, our renewal program and our new work program would go by the way and be replaced by a rebuild program, and therefore, we budget on average through our long-term plan that we're consulting on currently around about $18 million a year on underground infrastructure where we're either renewing or putting new stuff in. That's excluding what we're putting in for any growth-related activities. So in a rebuild sense, that money, it's very likely that money would be redirected towards any rebuild, and therefore, it's a good use of those funds. Councils for the last 2 or 3 LTPs has in their financial strategy acknowledged the need to maintain some financial capacity within its debt profile, and that's been for a number of reasons. But one of the more significant ones is to provide council with the opportunity or the ability to be able to respond to a significant event. That in recent years, that funding capacity has allowed council to respond to the need to remedy earthquake-prone buildings, which has come at a significant cost to council, and also the water supply drinking water program post 2016. But it's also there to provide capacity for council to respond to major events like this, and that's sort of one other way that council can, in a cost-effective way over the years, manage its ability to respond. So I think, through Mr. Chair, probably paragraph 4.2 wraps it up for where we're at this point in time. The report really is there to note the current exposure that we have in a sort of very extreme event scenario, but that we do have some funding tools in place to enable us to be able to respond at that upper limit, which is beyond the insurance cover that we currently have. Through that, redirecting of renewal and new work spend and that financial capacity that we have with our debt limits. We will consider and we will continue to have conversations though with LAP around what opportunities there are to extend the cover that we have, provide additional layers that we can opt into or opt out of should we want to, depending on the cost. I think one thing to acknowledge, we are one of the bigger councils within LAP, so for most councils that are members of LAP, increasing those upper limits probably isn't to their benefit. So it probably would come in the way of an additional layer which we can sort of opt in and opt out of, but we'll continue to have those conversations. So happy to take any questions.
All right, Mr. Chair, a couple of questions here. Councillor Sean.
Thank you. You've largely actually answered the main question I had, which is, do we have enough headroom within our funding tools, which by the sounds of things we do. I also appreciate that the report has gone through a number of scenarios with really the only the 1 in a 1,000 year event being the one where we would be self-funding a significant portion, but could do that within our funding tools. So in light of that, I think, insurance by its very nature is a little bit of crystal ball gazing and trying to limit risk. And I think the model we've got at the moment is sufficient. So I'm very happy to move the recommendations.
Councillor Travis.
And likewise, I'm happy to second them because I think our combination of belonging to the LAP scheme and private cover is entirely appropriate. I'm just really curious about the 3 scenarios that we've developed. And I wondered if councillors could have access to a map actually showing those 3 faults, because in fact that sort of helps with our considerations, because in fact I see that the closest to the Hastings CBD is 5 to 10 kilometres away, and depending on the direction of those particular faults, it has a lesser or greater impact on the infrastructure that we would be replacing, etc. So it doesn't impact on my being able to second, but just for future reference, I think that would be an interesting thing for councillors to have in their possession.
Well, thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We've spent and are spending a huge amount of money on upgrading our water system. Have we tried to estimate how much more resilient we might be as a result of that expenditure? Yeah, the plastic pipes look a very good alternative for asbestos cement and all the other stuff that gets you steel and so on. And it's not so much to affect the insurance cost, but rather just does it reduce the possibility of a catastrophic Christchurch type outcome, or are we now better protected, and will we be better protected in the future as this program sort of rolls right through?
Mr. Thu's sitting behind you, but I think it's logical to assume that as we go through and upgrade our infrastructure, replacing more brittle pipes with pipes that are more flexible, that they will perform better in that situation, and our losses in the event of a major event would be somewhat reduced. Craig?
Through you, Chair. I think Mr. Allen's covered a part of it. In terms of the question, have we quantified it? We quantified when we did some insurance assessment risk a couple of years ago, and when we redo that work in a few years, that will give us a quantified view. But yes, as we swap some of those brittle materials out with more, will be safer. But I think the key to remember is we're also installing a lot more new kit. So therefore, the total value of asset as at risk is bigger. So what we're probably doing in terms of an insurance risk is sort of balancing that overall scale.
So I presume the new kit actually means the average is improving.
The average would be better, but the overall net gain and net liability is probably still the same.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Sears.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. Just a comment really to say, yes, I'm very supportive of the recommendations. As Councillor Sholem has already noted, insurance is all about risk and that balance between enough and, you know, not being able to insure for every possibility or the 1 in 1,000 years. But I think the balance between the renewals and the headroom is sufficient. But I do also note that the continuing work you're doing to work with LAP and other insurers to constantly be looking at that further premium for higher cover is ongoing, and I think that's important that we're constantly renewing that and watching that balance. Thank you. Thanks for the report.
Councillor Keith.
Just briefly, it's all the roadworks. It's an inconvenience to pedestrians, cyclists, motorists. But I'm really proud of what we're doing to the city, the overhaul, the infrastructure. You know, we're well ahead. And I think rather than say, bugger this, which way do I go now? We should be celebrating this. I think it's great what we're doing. We're overhauling our city and we're looking ahead. I think that's a fantastic thing.
Thank you. So we have a mover, Councillor Sholem, second Councillor Travers. Put this recommendation. We received the report. All those in favour, keep my eye. Any against? Carried. Kia ora tātou. Our next item, item 6, land acquisition for public works policy. Kia ora, Sam.
Kia ora, good morning all. Through you, Mr. Chair, so this report follows on from a number of discussions over the past month or months regarding urban development, and in essence, it's what officers are seeking is that the committee directs officers to draft a land acquisition policy framework document, which we'll bring back for future review. Happy to take any questions.
Coming through, hard and fast. Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I'm interested to understand, so at present there is no framework around land acquisition, is that correct?
Through Mr Chair, no. There's guiding legislation, but there's no HDC owned framework that I'm aware of.
If I may, a follow-up. So through you, Chair, so at present, how is the decision-making around this topic addressed?
I guess for all acquisition, it's guided by legislation, the Public Works Act. It's fairly well laid out. So we're guided by that legislation for acquisition. Mr Gilman's going to add a bit to that.
Yes, thank you, Mr Chair, through you, Sue. Councillors, the reason Mr Faulkner is bringing the paper here is that, yes, there is quite specific legislation that guides the steps that we need to go through for land acquisition, and we've got a fairly substantial residential and commercial development program, as we're well aware of, over the next few years. So they're quite bespoke situations that can come up from time to time, and subject, and it's both the officer's view and feeding on the feedback from Councillor Kerr, I think it was, at the last council meeting. We feel it would be helpful if council's got its internal sort of policy framework that officers can benchmark any future recommendations that they may have against the framework, and then the framework may be of assistance to councillors as they deliberate the decisions that get made in future. You at least have a framework and a bit of an internal precedent to operate against. And in no way does it interfere with future decision making, because each decision is will be bespoke on the particular circumstances that may arise at any time.
If I may, Mr Chair, just ask a follow-up. So is the goal of this proposed framework really to provide perhaps greater consistency in the decision-making for governance?
Yeah, and for officers to follow to aid governance and decision-making.
Okay. With respect, I can see how this would potentially be beneficial to council, given that the makeup of this table changes on a regular basis, so every 3 years in fact, and so having a consistent framework which this council and future councils can refer to ensure robust decision making around this would be hugely beneficial. So on that basis, I'm very happy to move the recommendations.
A couple other questions. Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just reflecting back on water retention capacity when it's required for a residential development, we've got a couple of those out there at the moment. Some landowners are winners and others are losers through no fault of their own. Is there any way that all parties can be considered in a fair and equitable way when you're developing a new policy?
Yeah, look, and I think there's a range of things that guide us here in terms of the law and principles and precedent. And the reality is, the framework's going to assist us to do that. Whilst I don't know that I would classify it as winners and losers, but off a set of established principles and law about how we go about doing land development and valuation, I think having that clear and consistent that we follow as policy would be useful.
Yeah, thank you. Will you consider that on the way through when you're developing a new policy?
Yes. Yep. Can do, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, just a question around policy or procedures, and then referring to the summary of considerations, and there's a lot of topics saying not applicable, but it is something that does impact on the community, and so I'm just asking around that consultation process. It seems to me that it's not, because it's going to be internal, yet the impact is external, so I'd just like to get some clarification of that, please.
Yeah, I guess through this process, not a lot of thought has been given to what it may entail, but yes, I think we would have to tick all those boxes, and if there are concerned members of the community out there that would be considered in this process.
So secondary question then, therefore, with summary of consideration, should that not be noted in some way or form? If we've just got NA next to, I mean, there's no, you got NA from Marae, impact statement, sustainability, significance of engagement, consultation, which I think are sort of key things that have an impact.
Through you, Chair, I'd suggest that as we develop the policy and bring that back, is that we need to, as part of that policy, think about consultation and certainly think about those range of considerations.
Can that be an action in some way or form, so it's noted, please?
Yeah, we can action that. We'll note that down. It's a good question. I mean, you know, public land, Public Works Act has impacted communities for a long time, and so to have a strategy or a policy around that, you should probably go out to the community for consultation. Kia ora. Councillor Nixon, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll ask the question first, and then I'll sort of explain the question. The question I've got is, if we come across a difficult landowner who, decides they don't want to sell, and we have struck that over the years, does that automatically create a situation where we look again at the alternatives to that proposal? Now, I'll explain a couple of instances that I can think of. One would be the Northern Arterial bypass, where we started to acquire land under compulsion. It turned out some of it was Marae land. It was taken to the Environment Court. We lost. It cost us a lot of money, and we built a different road instead. And maybe we should have been looking at that right at the first instance. And I remember also, we also acquired, all this before my time, in fact, I think before all our time on council, we acquired a house in Te Mata Road because we thought we were going to put a road through Arataki, somewhere there, and effectively tossed the people out because we just took it over. And then we didn't go ahead. So that person lost their house. Maybe they came up with a better alternative, but it really worries me because it's a very powerful tool to be able to just say to somebody, well, we're going to take it off you anyway. And I just wonder to what extent we go back to the drawing board and say, well, hang on, is this the best option? Could that road have been put somewhere else? Where we did. We built a bypass road from Munga Territory, and that should have been considered at the time. So do I need to remind you what the question was? I'll have a go at answering your question, Councillor, and you can let me know how successful I am. Yes, I think what the officers are seeking here is to develop an internal sort of policy, operational framework for, as we said, that benchmarking of future processes and recommendations. What I think, Phil, you're describing here is essentially trying to give us, if we're embarking on a particular infrastructure set of works that follow a particular way and can rise or fall on whether you can access particular pieces of land, then part of that structured development process or planning process, that should be identified in that process as your risk. And a well-run project should have good quality risk management in there. And then that would have to be traversed with the executive and the councillors at the particular time, saying, look, to proceed with this project, it will require the acquisitions of these particular areas. Our framework for acquisition recommends these particular pathways, and then as part of your optioneering in that process, you should be saying, well, these are potential crunch points in terms of necessary acquisition. Are there options for alternatives, and what are the implications of those options? And then those will be pretty much your governance and your strategic decisions to be made at the time. But if I think if this framework is essentially also a prompt guide to officers to saying, look, as this project evolves, and if it does require acquisition, it puts council in potentially tenuous decision-making positions in future. We don't want to back ourselves into a corner unless we absolutely have to. And if you get to that stage, you'd better thoroughly reviewed all options and wrung everything out as far as you can to give the council as much sort of decision-making movement as possible. If I could just add one comment, I just want to make sure we avoid the situation where we take a course of action because we are able, legally we're able, when it may not actually be the best route to take for the solution we're looking for. Yeah, there are always alternatives available. I really worry about compulsory acquisition. I'm still not sure how I'm going to vote. I won't vote against, I may abstain.
Thank you, Councillor. Your Worship.
Through you, Chair. I'm just needing a bit more clarification on this, actually. For me, this is, if I think about my 10 years in council, how many times this has arisen, and there's very few. I'm interested, because the Act is so prescriptive, that to work within that legislative framework that is far above us, my question is, do we actually need our own policy? Are the councils around New Zealand, do they have policies for this? Because I just don't know that, you know, we're at a criteria, we're at a time at the moment that we're trying to deliver houses. And do we need to be writing policy on something that could well be considered from somewhere else, or do we actually need it? Because if I look at probably my time, there's probably twice or three times it has come in front of us as a council to look at a public work acquisition. And so I just, you know, I'm just saying, are we creating policy for the sake of it? Like, how much is this going to be referred to? How, and can we work under the legislation? And I need that advice.
The prospect of compulsory acquisition is merely one matter within the policy. I see it more as a guideline for officers working in this space, which, in terms of bringing on our residential and commercial developments, are complex. And I just reflect back to Marae Road and Irongate on the commercial side of things. We didn't get anywhere near compulsory acquisition, but we did do a lot of land acquisition works and so forth. So it's a useful framework for the officers who chop and change in their roles over time as well to operate within. And going back to Councillor Nixon's point before, I think it reinforces the staff as we go on our future planning that you need to, as much as possible, optioneer alternates for where you do need to acquire situations, rather than risk having a mindset of, well, this is what we're going to do, and if you reach your worst case scenario, well, you'll go down the acquisition path. Whereas if it's at the outset of the process, if it's in our mindset that we need to always keep those options in mind, again, it just becomes a sort of an operational refresher of how we should be operating as best as we can.
Yeah, just to make a comment there, you know, I think policies are there to keep council staff and council safe around, you know, implementing activities. So, and I think this one is that also. Sure, we hopefully don't need to use it, but the amount of just the sheer volume of activity we have in housing, and looking forward over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be more. You know, having this policy, I think, is probably a you know, sensible thing to do. Should we, and you know, have to use it, but hopefully we don't.
If indeed we are to write a policy framework, could I urge that in the formulation of that policy and in the consultation we work really closely with our Heretonga Takoto Noa committee, because in fact you know, as a former history teacher, I have to tell you the Public Works Act has been responsible for some of the most egregious travesties in New Zealand history, particularly in relation to Māori land. So I would just like to see that we fully engage with our stakeholders.
So through you, Chair, just a follow-up question from me. I'd like to understand if Tauranga City Council have done a policy like this, because why would we start reinventing the wheel for us? They experienced the biggest growth in a very short time frame in New Zealand, as we know. I just think that, you know, we just need to be really sensible about how important this is in our massive framework and program of work that we've got at the moment, and how often it's going to be referred to. I just want that to be taken into account, please.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually see this as a really positive, and Simon touched on I think it was called the Northeastern Arterial, or whatever it was. The land that you referred to as Māori land wasn't multiple owned Māori land, but the point was we as a council chose not to pursue that. So this actually allows us to build in our framework what our standards are, not just relying on what the law says we can do. But I agree also with Councillor Travers around getting the appropriate information in so that our framework represents our way of doing it. And I'd like to think that is a standard higher than what the law imposes upon us. And that's why I'm really supportive of this. I think it also will allow consistency in time as we do things, because we treated Te Ara Kahakatea quite differently from how we treated the Northern Arterial. And I think we need to capture that process.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Did you get a record? Yeah, a couple of ways. So I'll put the recommendation that that they be received, and all those in favour, keep my eye. Any against? Yep. Thank you. All right. Thanks for that, Sam. Item number 7. So welcome, Alex. And this is to discuss the recommendations from the Eco District Subcommittee meeting held on 11th of March with regard to the Kairunga Gardens Reserve Management Plan.
Good morning, Your Worship, Mr. Chair and councillors. As we've heard, the Eco District Subcommittee heard the submissions on the draft Kairunga Gardens Management Plan on the 11th of March. The subcommittee considered 34 submissions and heard 8 submitters in person. The report includes the subcommittee's recommendations made at the hearing. I will take the report as read and hand over to Councillor Sears to talk about the subcommittee's process.
Very cool. Kia ora. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there were 34 submissions and 8 very robust and enjoyable submissions in the chamber. We had a fantastic morning. Oh, sorry, I should have said apologies from Councillor Redstone, who was chair for the process, who's away sick, so I'm a ring-in. Sorry about that. Yeah, it was wonderful to hear from the community, and I'd like to say up front that I think almost every submitter opened with huge compliments to both Alex and Rachel Stewart on the process that they'd run. They used words like exceptional, impressive, so inclusive. They talked specifically about how well our team listened and took what was said and had turned it into the type of vision that they had for their park. So huge compliments to the team for that. Kairunga is really unusual in that it has large trees and walkway. It has a really shaped and specific cottage garden, has heritage buildings. It has an arts and crafts society that leases buildings from us. They also have their own building, which they're building onto. It has the miniature trains, and then it also has a large playground for community members to walk with and for children to play in. So there's actually a lot of views and a lot of people in a very small, quite a small reserve. And what was really impressive about the feedback was that every group felt they had been heard and what they had dreamed of for their park had been incorporated into this reserve management plan. The submitters were, I think, 95% incredibly supportive. There was a few small things, and we were able to incorporate almost every request within the submissions into the plan. They were only little extensions or slight movements, so all of those were incorporated. I think truly we can say that the reserve management plan is a true picture of the aspirations of all these groups in the community for this beautiful reserve. And I acknowledge Alex's first reserve management plan for council and congratulate you. And I'm sure either myself or other committee members or Alex would be happy to discuss any details.
Kia ora, thank you. Councillor Sears, your worship.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to take a moment, actually, to acknowledge everybody who's been part of this process. And I think back to our first meeting in the function centre at Havelock North, probably 2 years ago. And then I follow up with a very well-chaired meeting by Councillor Sholem in the Performing Arts Stadium at headquarters at Kironga. And I just, you know, this is a process that is a hard process. And we have a very passionate community that loves their parks and reserves. And this is no exception. And Kironga is one of those really precious places that's been gifted, like many other reserves in our district, and gifted to the people, has incredible history and heritage, and is loved by so many. And to capture all of those, and I've heard from 2 of the verbal submitters, and they, you know, just came up to me actually at the church fair last week and just said to me how much they were very, very happy with the process. So this is a process that has worked incredibly well. It has been none of these processes are easy. They are a lot of pressure on our staff. There are a lot of pressure on the councillors who lead them, but the reserve management plan process is a very robust one because it captures everybody's viewpoint. And I just congratulate you all for this incredibly hard work. We've had numerous people along the journey. I think Councillor Harvey was part of the early days. Everybody has been kind of part of this over a couple of years in some form or another. And so it's, yeah, we've got a way forward, and I think it's an amazing piece of work. So congratulations to you all.
Just a tautoko those mihi to all those involved eco districts and those that have been involved, staff that have been involved in listening to submissions. Mihi nu kia koutou. So, Councillor Sears, you're happy to move? Move the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Sholem. I'll put that, all those in favour, ki mai ai. Any against? Kia ora, thank you. All right, so we're going to move into our reports from our subcommittee chairs, and we're going to start with the District Planning and Bylaw Subcommittee. Kei a koe, Councillor Watkins. Time is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, our planned meeting for the 24th of February was postponed, and it's now been rescheduled for the 13th of April. So there are no recommendations obviously coming forward to this meeting. They will come forward in the next round. The report is brief, but it does have before you the work program update, and I would just like to make comment on one or two of those priorities. In particular, it was interesting to note that our gaming policy, we moved from a status quo to a sinking lid, and it's very interesting to note that Napier City did exactly the same thing. Very close vote, I think it was 4-5, but we are aligned across the two cities, and I think that is a significant move. The residential intensification design guideline, which was launched in February, there was an incredible amount of work that went into this, and although it's very early in its life, the response from the industry and those who are using it is incredibly positive. And I don't think I've actually seen a document embraced in such a way in this chamber by the industry as that design guideline. So for all those who are involved in all the hard work, congratulations. It's a great plus for us. I'd just like, through you, Chair, if I could just ask Rowan to just comment on the investigation into the inclusionary zoning for housing. So I just want to make sure everybody is clear as to what that entails and the possible teeth or lack of teeth it may have at the end of the process. So, Rowan, you might like to just expand on that.
Yes, thank you. Kia ora, everyone. This is a piece of work that we're just doing at the moment to respond to councillors' request to look at this aspect of how we can get more affordable housing into our new urban development areas. It is something that is a little problematic because it's going to, rely on the developers to buy into this. It's a report that we will be bringing forward to district plan and bylaws, but it is quite a complex issue, and it is something that other local authorities have grappled with, and Queenstown has actually taken a different approach, which we will bring back and discuss with you. But I think it's going to be an interesting piece of work for you to consider.
So again, Rowan, it's developers actually have the final say on what they want to put on their greenfield site.
Well, we can put policies in there to try and bring them into that space, but in the end, they do have the financial decision making in terms of their development. So, as I said, it has been tried in other areas, so, and not been entirely successful. So,
thank you.
Yeah, there are other options that we can look at, and that's what we'll probably discuss with you.
Thanks, Rowan.
Through you, Chair. Has it been successful anywhere, Rowan, in terms of your investigations to date?
Not entirely, no.
Yeah. One of the major items that is on the agenda for our next meeting, subcommittee meeting, is the Marae, the Tomato Peak plan change. And I mean, I think we all understand the history behind this. In its simplest terms, it's aimed to protect the whole of the eastern face of Tomato Peak. So that'll be a major paper at our next meeting, and it would be really nice to get that signed off and into the plan. Apart from that, I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory there. If anyone has any questions?
No. Well. Through you, Mr. Just on the forestry / the Councillor Watley says you'll be undertaken by, we know what a huge problem it is. They just chop them down, leave their rubbish there. It says to be monitoring to be undertaken by the forestry officer. What does that look like?
Through you, Chair, there is one person employed to do this work. The monitoring is being done, and I think that person is here once a week. Rowan, am I correct? Just updating us on what's happening. You might like to follow
John,
up on that. John?
We have a joint office between ourselves and the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. and it's worked really well. We provide him with information from resource consents, and he's aware of all the various consents that get granted by the regional council, and it's been a proposal that's worked really well. Tanya, or Councillor Kerr, she's had first-hand experience with the gentleman, and he's planned himself. She has seen his work in progress, and I think it's been very effective in getting the message out to various forestry operators.
I'd like to support that it's working very, very well. We're gathering the information, they're monitoring it, and if we need to make changes, we'll certainly know.
Yeah, I was going to add to that. Thanks for that. I just want to know how much grunt do they have? How much have they got some grunt behind all of that? That's what I wanted to know.
Yes.
Seems as they do, Councillor. Yeah.
I'll know that when we see the ships coming back up the Waiwara River. Thank you.
Okay, that's all from the Chair.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, we'll get a mover in a second to move by Councillor Watkins, or you want to move that report?
I'm happy to move.
Yep. And second by Councillor Nixon. I'll put that. All those in favour, keep my eye.
Aye.
Any against? Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Awesome mahi. Councillor Redstone's not here, so Councillor Sears. Kei akui.
Thank you. We've also got Mr. Thew here to support it, as you say, and Councillor Redstone's chair, she's away. I think the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, there'll be another meeting to really knuckle down into the strategy. We have the great privilege of welcoming Louise Stetner and Deanna Painter into our team, who have started doing some work for us, which has been really, really impressive. So there's a feeling that we're moving well forward, even though it does feel like it's taking a long time for the eco strategy to come together. I think that the changes that as a council we're trying to look back into all the background services and across all the work streams and pick up the pieces into this one strategy, and while it might be a long time coming, hopefully it will be a document that will really inform many, many years ahead into the way that we look into the environmental and the eco processes across all the work streams. So you'll see we've somehow managed to kind of pull it into these 5 priorities of mana whenua partnerships, water and land resources, climate and carbon, natural environment, and council services. Kind of seems quite small, but actually those 5 processes expanded out are really a huge undertaking and work stream. So, as I say, with the addition of these very, very talented women working with us, we feel that we're starting to build the ground for something with a lot of depth to it. And I'm sure Craig will, Mr. Thew, will have something to add.
So through you, Chair, briefly to add to Sophie's discussion, just to confirm, so the subcommittee meeting on the 6th on Tuesday at 10 a.m. to go through the work that Louise and Deanna have done and to grow that tree and to trim its branches as the committee sees fit. And it is, as Councillor Sears talks about, quite wide-reaching, this committee, because it sort of almost will set policy settings which will district development and greater communities will need to consider and give effect to as part of their doing their work. But also importantly, a theme around that the way that this council operates and behaves in the delivery of its services, considering those wider sustainability objectives. So lots of mahi to still do, but definitely shaping up. Yeah. Probably the other key piece to note, and obviously the last paper, 2 papers back around the Karanga RMP. So this committee has a reasonable amount of heavy lifting to do over the next 12 months as well, with the Estelle Reserve, the Havelock, Tainui and so forth Reserve Management Plan Review, and the Frimley Park. So they are in their first stage. It's stage 1, which is a data gathering phase where we have an independent entity doing the survey, collecting data. Stage 2 is programmed to happen through May, June, which is the analysis of the information from that company. Stage 3, which is where we start pulling together the what does that picture look like, what are those themes, and so the committee will get involved in that stage before we go back out to the community to say, this is what we've heard from you in the first stage, is that what you're wanting us to do? That set of feedback will again be taken into account, and that'll set up for the draft consultation plan for formal consultation, and then we'll get into the formal consultation. So it's a 7-stage, well over a year-long process to ensure we get all of community's views before council decides on its plan. Any questions?
A couple of questions. Councillor Watkins.
Sorry.
No.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Can I just acknowledge Sophie and Anne and the team and getting to setting out priorities, and I would like to think that you know, we're halfway through this term. This whole well-being of environmental and eco is absolutely a well-being of this government, and we have to make sure that we're across and submitting to all policy change and looking at how we, so the climate change, I think it's going to be the submission that's going forward. When's that, Craig? Has the Eco District Committee been in part of that, looking at that?
I know Mr. Clues has been going through all that. Sorry, he's not here. I haven't caught up with him just to see, so but ideally we'll touch base on that on the 6th as well.
It's coming up shortly, so we just make sure that we're getting our voice into that. And I also think that there's some you know, easy pickings here, and I think that, you know, what the team have been talking about, and just looking at even water collection on our, you know, 2,500 new homes we're going to be building in the district over the next 5 to 10 years. You know, we see that our Napier colleagues are already doing water collection, and I think there's an opportunity just to be able to pick up some of that stuff and actually say, well, why wouldn't we do it here? Like, we don't have to write policy, we don't have to do a whole lot of stuff, but that I'd like the committee to think about just some of those sort of easy actions that we could get underway with all this new housing development that's going to, and how we incentivise and how we encourage people to collect and store water.
So through you, Chair, just as a reminder to councils, we actually already do have a policy in terms of stormwater retention in urban development. So as part of the Code of Practice and our Better Design Guide, properties are required to retain, if they have too much impervious area, so too much concrete, too much roof, they're required to mitigate their effects, so there is no additional stormwater flow. The discussion that the committee, though, are moving into is around what level of storage of water additional to that you might have for watering of gardens. There is a number of national studies in that space which, in Hawke's Bay in particular, because of lack of rainfall, it has some effect, but it doesn't have the same effect in areas such as Tararua or on New Plymouth.
You know, I've had discussions with members of the public about collecting more water off our houses because of the water shortages that we get during the summertime, and also how we reduce hard stand surfaces, concrete, etc., etc. Look at other ways of doing driveways and things where, you know, less hard stand. Yeah. Councillor Kerr.
Happy to move, or happy to second if Sophie wishes to move.
If you want to move that, moved by Sophie, seconded by Councillor Kerr. Put that, all those in favour, keep my eye. Aye. Any against? Carried. Thank you very much, Eco Districts. Mahi pai. All right, next report from District Development Subcommittee. Councillor Sholem. Councillor Kerr.
Our right-hand man, Lee Neville's, hasn't been able to get back in time, so between Wendy and I, I'm sure we'll manage. Yep. I'll start off and then I'll get Wendy to speak to one of the items. Start with a good one. The spend in the CBD was up, so that was nice to report, to have a report. As you know, the Muni's under full steam. Stage 2 is about to start, and we're now out actively seeking tenants, and you would have had emails and correspondence regarding that. The CBD Revitalization plan, it was great to see Landmark Square finished, and my goodness, it looks very, very cool. We have taken an option with NZTA on the Innovating Streets program. That's whereby we'll get 300,000K from NZTA to invest in low-cost experimental, let's try out a plan to activate streetscapes so people use them more. Temporary design rather than big permanent structures. So the 200 East Hedatonga Street has been chosen, which is becoming our east side hospitality area. And Rachel's got a deadline to have everything done by the end of June. So we were very supportive of the cool pictures that we saw. We had an update on industrial land, and there was nothing that raised concerns with us. And me personally, I'm really excited to see, to look forward to getting details of the Civic Square redevelopment, because I think those the library, there's so much there that just needs to be enhanced. And the Tamata Peak Corridor Management Plan, Marae came and gave us an update. He'd spoken to us and given us a PowerPoint presentation earlier in the year. We'd raised some questions, we had some concerns. When it came back the next time, we were very happy with it. And there's now going to be a workshop held with the stakeholder group on the 20th of April. So that will be all those parties that may be affected by it. And I understand that we've got Councillor Nixon, Dixon and Redstone are also part of that stakeholder group. And then if I can just hand over to Wendy regarding the Hawke's Bay Business Hub update. She's a lot closer to this than I am.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Yes, we had a bit of an informal presentation around the Business Hub, how it's tracking so far. No KPI reporting just yet, because that's due at our next update, as per the past recommendations around establishing the pilot or the trial. So we're 4 months in now. They've presented quite a comprehensive program of training and networking opportunities that they're providing the business community. We had Ms. Sandra was at the blessing and spoke at the blessing of the Business Hub just recently, which was great to see that finally happen, a bit delayed with COVID. And now it's really just about giving the Hub its opportunity to meet KPIs and then report back to district development and then through to council for what we do next, what the future looks like.
Good point, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you. Just a comment and an observation. Yesterday we had the Focus on Business breakfast, which was fantastic, but I don't recall any reference to the Hub. So I think in the future, if we've got those types of events that are being attended by business people, then we should be giving that a bit of a plug as well.
Yep. Oh boy. Around the new funding for the development of the 100, 200 block? 200 block? Mm. So I just had a question from a person that works in the block and has found out about that particular development, or it's pilot, it's a pilot. How do we, and this may kind of come into the kind of CBD development stuff, how do we incorporate Māori design flavours into our into our streetscapes kind of you know, all this work that's going on. So that was the question. I said, oh, well, I'll bring it to this meeting and we'll find out what the answer is.
I was looking for Rachel, who lives and breathes this.
Maybe that can be passed on to Rachel.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question.
If I might just jump in. I think the thing to keep in mind with that particular piece of work that's happening is it is very much constrained by the funding opportunity program, so it's not reflective of what we're doing more broadly. So I think it would be a really great thing for this committee to ask a report to come back from Rachel around the broader works within the CBD, but for that particular piece of work that's being done, which is really specific funding, the prerequisite of receiving that funding was a co-design philosophy, which had to happen within a very set geographical area, so this one street, and so it was actually really driven by the businesses that are in that street, what that money would be used for, and the idea is, as you said, is a pilot, and then if we choose to retain that in the future or grow it, then that's where council has more direct input, if that makes sense.
Well, if I could add through you, Mr. Chair, is obviously Charles, who's on board in council now. Part of Charles' role is following the council having adopted the Te Ranga design principles, is to do a cultural landscape assessment, to do a sort of audit, to actually develop a long-term plan. And as we know, we have an opportunity to lead through the investments that we make in public infrastructure and public work. I think, as the Mayor's raised earlier about the building on the fantastic legacy of landmarks, you know, how that's reconstituted, having adopted the Te Ranga design principles. And then, as we know, it is about how we've got some great examples happening in Hastings, but how we also work alongside other government agencies, private sector developers to actually bring life to the Te Ranga design principles. So I think having recently adopted them, having Charles on board, which is a massive part of his work, is about how we start to develop that long-term roadmap for how we give life, you know, to those principles. So that work's underway, and we'll come back to, you know, district development and strategy and policy in due course.
You know, that's good. That's good. I don't know if anyone's been down to Kaikoura recently, but, you know, after the quake, they redeveloped that whole coast line. But you'll see how they've incorporated mana whenua values into the design and the storyboards and the whole kind of look and feel of the, because, you know, it's concrete and steel, but you can actually make it feel, you know, relatable to mana whenua. It was just, yeah, the conversation came up. I mean, we got the big puti, you know, the big flower, you know, for Mayor Dwyer, and so, you know, when someone's looking at that, it looks like a flower, but you know, how do we relate that to mana whenua? You know, there's just questions that you can think about. Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, just briefly, I'm glad Charles is on board. How do we make the businesses aware of it? Do they know it even exists, the Te Ranga strategy? I guess that's one of Charles'.
It's part of what Charles is on board for. I mean, the reality is with the Te Ranga design principles, much like the medium design guide, they're not regulatory instruments at this stage. No. It's about raising awareness, working with people that are investing, whether they're private developers or, you know, hospital or the Ministry of Education. It's like, how do we make sure in a, you know, like working to a plan that we're using that investment that's happening, public or private, to kind of reflect those Te Ranga design principles and what our community actually ends up looking like. So that's the mahi that's in front of us.
Your Worship.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just understanding the karamu, and I'd like to ask Mr. O'Shaughnessy, please, could you give us an update, please, where our art investment are at for Te Ara Kahikatea? Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. The three huge 7 or 8 metre structures have now been formally welded and put all back together. And Chris, who's working on the what you call the faces of the characters, he's preparing the carvings, which will make moulds, and then they'll be set in concrete. So the next step is the main structures have been completed. Our structural engineers looking at the foundations that need to be put in the ground on Te Tiara Kakatea. And thirdly, the committee who we've been working with from Tītai Whenua will be coming out to visit and just check on the progress. So there's a bit of discussion going on about the firestones that were found during the construction of Te Tiara Kakatea and where they should be put in terms of in the sculptures or in foundations in the ground. So there's really good progress. We're hoping that they, with the artists being artists, there's a little bit more discussion that they're going to go through, but we're pretty confident that the main structure's all completed, but I'm not going to give you a date because with artists being artists, they could change. So, but we're really confident we've got the structural part done, we've got the foundation ready, and we're also looking at whether or not we can light them at night from existing poles, street lighting poles. But they're looking pretty impressive, and what we'll probably do is after our next meeting with the committee from Tītai Whenua, then we'll bring back some photos for council just to show you the progress. So it's going
Thank you. Through you, Chair, can I just make sure that both Mana Whenua and the funders have an update, because it was quite some time ago that we all met to get started and have a look at where was progress. I think it was cold, it was last winter. So we just need to, there's serious funding gone into this from our local funders. So if they could please have an update and also Mana Whenua, the team. Okay.
I'll mention that the funders will also come.
Oh, cool. Thank you very much.
So, ngā mihi kia koutou, District Development, the Chair and,
happy to move.
Happy to move. Bishop, seconded by Councillor Sears, put that the District Development Subcommittee report be received. All those in favour, key my eye. Any against? Carried. Thank you very much. And now I hand the time over to Councillor Lawson for a report from the Greater Communities Subcommittee.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge our new GM for Community Wellbeing and Services, Rebecca Dinwoody. We had a very good meeting the other day, the Deputy Chair, Damon Harvey and I, and with an update about where the strategy and policy is for the committee. And all the bones are there, it just needs pulling together, and that's going to be pulled together and a work plan revised draft available by the 20th of April. But despite the fact that we haven't had a finalised strategy, there's been a lot of mahi being done. So I guess some of the highlights just to point them out, community plans. So there's 3 new community plans nearing completion. That is Te Puhi, Kimberley and Roreka, with Kimberley coming to the committee on the 13th of April. Also, Mahora is underway. In terms of Safer Hastings, a very good workshop was had in March, and there's a new implementation plan being developed right now with 3 key action points. And a meeting is being arranged for about family harm with the DHB and police early May. So that's really interesting, exciting to be moving ahead with that. In terms of mahi for youth, I think, well, the report explains itself, but I think what's worth noting is the fact that there is a caravan which is going to be on the road very shortly, and that is to enable the Mahi Youth Program to be very visible and accessible to our communities. Those are the main things I wanted to point out. Work is continuing on homelessness, providing some accommodation for them. And I think that's about all. So, yeah, happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Councillor Lawson, and our Greater Communities Subcommittee for the mahi that you guys are doing. And our next meeting is actually going to be, next strategy and policy meeting is going to be in Kimberley on date? 4th of May. 4th of May. So we're going to take this meeting up to Kimberley. Yep, because we're going to be launching the Kimberley community plan at that particular meeting. So we'll go out to the community, make it easier for the community to, we're going to them rather than getting them to come to us.
Good idea. Actually, to add to that, I should mention that the master plans for Kimberley and Paxmere have been scoped out by the.
Does that mean you'll come out to Te Pohui when we sign off our one?
For council to go out and see some of our communities and you know, feel that wairua that communities have, and I'm sure we'll do that when we go out to Kimberley next month. So yeah, no, thank you very much to our Great Communities Subcommittee. Ka pai. All right, so yep, so we've got a mover. Councillor Lawson, seconded by Councillor Watkins. All those in favour, ki mai ai. Any against? None carried. Thank you very much. So that completes our agenda today. Just to note, councillors, we do have 2 informal items to discuss once we close this hui. Yeah, so if you can just stick around. So